Oh, hey, how's it going there, guys? That was an awesome talk. I didn't hear very much of it, but it did sound very riveting from where I was sitting. Next up is going to be the Indiana State of Design and Excellence. We're going to have Blair Milo, Andrew Mitchell, Julia Day, Randy Royer, and the moderator is going to be Richard McCoy. Give them a round. Oh, and also everybody, there's going to be a Q&A station from the last one, so you're going to want to head over to there if you have any questions.
Hey folks, welcome. My name is Richard McCoy. I am the Executive Director of Landmark Columbus Foundation, and I'm really thrilled to be here today at Indy Design Week, talking about the state of Indiana design excellence. We're gonna have a conversation about this. This is really a great panel and some of the smartest folks around to have this conversation, so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves in just a minute, but what I thought I would do is maybe frame up the conversation a little bit, and then we'll hear from each of them. But this is a new project from our organization through the ARM Columbus Design Institute. And what we wanted to do is to start a yearly check-in on what is the state of design excellence in Indiana. And I'm doing this from Columbus, Indiana, and with our mission. And I want to just maybe provide a little bit of context, because Columbus has this amazing history and legacy of design excellence. And I want to quote a 1964 speech when the CEO of Cummins donated a $1 million golf course at that time to the city of Columbus. And in this donation, he gave a speech, and he says that we would like to see this community come to be not the cheapest community in America, but the very best community of its size in the country. We would like to see it become the city in which the smartest, the ablest, the best young families anywhere would like to live. A community that is open in every single respect to persons of every race, color, and opinion. One that makes them feel welcome and at home here. A kind of speech I think we could hear most mayors or civic leaders making today about talent attraction and retention. And so the hypothesis of this sort of program is that quality of place is one of the key drivers to talent attraction and retention. And that further, one of the key inflection points for quality of place is design and design excellence. And so what we've done is we've put together a really great panel to look at this question from a number of perspectives. And I'm going to turn this panel or this conversation over to the panelists to introduce themselves. And what I'd just like to ask you to do, panelists, is just to introduce yourself, explain your affiliation, and maybe where you're dialing in from, because I think the interesting part is that we're a little bit around the state and in some cases the country right now. And so Blair, could I ask you to start first?
Well, I'm excited to be here, Richard. Thanks so much for the invitation to join this incredible group and to participate in this conversation with you and everybody here. That I have the opportunity to serve as the Secretary of Career Connections and Talent for the state of Indiana. I'm joining today's conversation from the capital of Indiana, that I am downtown Indy, and am thrilled to get to not only have this conversation, but the regular work that I get to do. But still, we're moving into this space where we're spending a lot more time in the office, but still kind of balancing some of those pieces out. And I have had the opportunity as a secretary to be able to interact with a number of communities as we think about how we are attracting, developing, and connecting talent, and thinking about growing the population, increasing education attainment as we look at different types of roles in the future of work, and ensuring people are moving along the economic spectrum as a part of thinking through connecting talent overall. And so certainly chief amongst particularly talent attraction is thinking about that quality of place, quality of life aspect of the work that we get to do. But I really see that as only one of at least a three-legged stool, if not even more legs than that, of how we think about the talent system, of certainly having attraction be a key component of that, and how people are attracted to and choosing communities for themselves and their families to live in, but also understanding that lifelong learning journey that's necessary as we see the future of work continue to evolve, and ensuring success along some of those different milestones for however somebody might determine what success looks for them in their career advancements and for their families' opportunities as well. I'll be happy to share some of the experiences that we've had from a state perspective with 21st Century Talent Regions that has tried to really emphasize some of the idea around quality of place and design excellence that feeds into that conversation from a very collaborative perspective. And I come to this work having previously served as the mayor of LaPorte, Indiana. Many folks here probably know it as the Hub of Awesome. And so very thrilled to be able to just kind of share some of the lessons learned and how we've tried to grow upon that and how that feeds all in. So thank you, and excited to dive in with the rest of the crew today.
Well, thanks, Blair. I'm going with Blair. I didn't know if I should go with Honorable Blair, Secretary Milo, wasn't really sure, but I guess it's the mayor of the Hub of Awesome. So the mayor of Awesome.
I also respond to, hey, you.
Well, it's a great honor to have you here. I'm going to keep going north and ask Andrew, who I'm just meeting here for the first time, to introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Richard. My name is Andrew Mitchell. I am the current president of AIA Indiana, and we represent over 1,000 architects and design professionals in the state of Indiana. We're really focused on, the health and well-being of our communities and how design plays a process in that, not just at a state level, but also as a regional level with our various allied professions. I'm also an associate principal at MKM Architecture and Design in Fort Wayne. For over 40 years, we've worked with communities and partners to understand the relationship between health and design, and working with these communities to improve the well-being and create places where people want to live, work, and play. And I think that for us, community health is contextual, and such, if we raise the quality of life for the citizens at the margins, we improve design for all. And I'm really excited to participate in this panel today.
Well, thanks, Andrew. Glad to have you. And I haven't been to Fort Wayne in a while, but I hear that there's a really cool new riverfront place there that's worth checking out. So, well, thanks for joining us, and nice to meet you. I'm going to head now, I think, out of the state and say hi to Julia Day.
Hi, Richard. Nice to see you again. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you remotely. I am based in New York City, but have a real strong connection to your part of the world. I'm married to someone from Columbus, not that Columbus, the other one in Ohio. And I went to college in St. Louis. And to top it off, and Richard is sick of hearing this story because we've been on a few meetings together, my dad was a film editor on the 1970s film Breaking Away that took place in Bloomington, a movie I've watched countless times because he's got a tiny line in it when he says, "Let's go, Mike," when Mike is swimming across the quarry and trying to beat the college student. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I am a director in the Gale, New York office, and Gale is an urban design firm that focuses on public spaces and centering people in the city-making process. We work with municipal leaders, public sector leaders, developers, foundations, community-based organizations to create lively and inviting public spaces, including streets and sidewalks. And we do this because we believe in the power of place to improve our quality of life in so many ways, to reinvigorate our downtowns economically, to reduce disparity, and to make our societies more just. And I already want to echo a lot of things Andrew and Blair just said related to that. One thing that distinguishes Gale is our approach to understanding the existing conditions and local identity in a place. We try to uncover this using a methodology called the Public Space Public Life Survey, which helps us to collect data on how people use a place and how the social or other activities there relate to the built environment. We often say that you measure what you care about, And, a lot of cities and organizations don't actually have data on where people walk or where they spend time, or the softer things like how they feel in a place, and do they feel a sense of belonging or inclusion. And we think while this type of data isn't necessarily earth-shatteringly interesting, it often affirms like your sense of what's going on somewhere. It's incredibly valuable to have it in order to really center people in the city making and the urban design process, and to say we actually don't want to start a design process by first asking what should the form of a place look like or what materials should we need. We really need to start by saying what is the life we're trying to create here and who are the people we want to serve, and let's make sure that the design and the form follows that. And then specifically for the past 5 years with Gil, I have had the privilege to work with several organizations, recently the Walton Family Foundation, and actually thinking about how could we define design excellence in their case in the Northwest Arkansas context, and do this not to be prescriptive, but to create a shared language that could then be used to guide investments and also to help measure impact and then tell stories about the power of investing in design excellence. So looking forward to furthering the discussion with all of you.
Thanks, Julie, and it's been great to get to know you a little bit over the past few months from some of our other work. I love this idea of you measure what you care about. And to me, it's so clear and makes a lot of sense. And you definitely have some Indiana street cred if you have a parent who's in breaking away. I mean, that's so, and maybe to that, to put Randy on the spot, can you, Randy, explain to us your Indiana street cred? Randy is a longtime friend of our organization, so forgive me for being a little crass, but I felt comfortable doing that.
So my Indiana street cred, I was born and raised in Indiana, not far away from where Breaking Away was actually filmed. So I'm a landscape architect. I was am the immediate past president of INASLA. I'm a senior principal at Hitchcock Design Group. I run our Indianapolis studio. And I've lived in Japan for a year, worked there. I spent my early career in South Florida, and then ended up coming back to Indiana. And I think Richard and I have had a number of discussions. I moved back to my hometown because I loved Columbus and what it had to offer. I had to move away to realize what I'd lost. But we've had a number of discussions just about this very issue of why do people not want to come to Indiana as much as we sure would like them to? How do we recruit people? We have trouble as a professional design office recruiting people. We've got an office in downtown Indianapolis, which is a fantastic city, and it's changed in the 20 years since I've been back in Indiana. It has changed incredibly. But so Richard and I have had this kind of dialogue quite a bit. We've worked a lot on a number of projects in Columbus with Exhibit Columbus and the great things that you're doing for the city. I'm actually in Columbus right now, but probably a couple miles away from Richard. So that is a little bit about me, and that's my street cred.
That's great. It's some pretty great street cred, and it's actually a great transition to the first question. And it's really, Randy, your story of leaving and coming back is similar to mine. I left the state after undergraduate and never to return. But then, I was only gone for 5 years. But Blair, it's so interesting. Your position, as I understand it, was created by the governor in a declaration because he estimated that in the next 10 years or so, Indiana is going to need to add about 1 million jobs. I think this has been, I don't mean to hold you to that number, but it was a big number for the state. And for a state that right now is increasing its population a little bit every year, I think it's about 5,000 people are increasing, making a big jump growing and filling a bunch of jobs is a big task. And so maybe that's the question to you, is that what drives the future of talent attraction, and how does the quality of place fit into that?
Well, I want to just clarify a little bit around some of the data there of the expectation of at least 1 million job openings over the next, that was a couple years ago that we were looking at that. So, I would say we're down to about the next 6 to 7 years or so that we're anticipating job openings. So within that, you're looking at transitions within people moving to different jobs as well. So it's not necessarily net new that we're talking about there, but I think the ambition and the idea behind it is still critical for how we think about attraction. And we do have a positive story to tell around the fact that we do have net in migration at this point, which is a recent transition for Indiana, and we are outperforming our peer states in net in migration in many different ways. But you also start to break some of that down, and you see that's really happening particularly in urbanized areas across the state. And so there are pieces that we have to understand around regions from a perspective of really capturing the personality and the economy of Indiana, being both rural and urban, and certainly, and I think Julia will appreciate this too, of some of what the Walton Foundation and Walmart folks have put together of looking at really some different different components as to how you describe territories as exurban and small economies and those components. So we have a very diverse landscape, but where we see the net growth is really in particular urbanized areas. So we have to think about how that all comes together. And I come back to some of what we just started talking a little bit about, of the connection that people feel to the places, the emotions that are there, the sense of community that they and their families feel as a part of the places that they are in. And so certainly the built environment can cultivate some of those different experiences, particularly around, I think, active transportation elements, creating ways for people to feel engaged in that built environment. And those are the kinds of things that lead to the long-term sustainable growth that makes people want to come back here. I, like you and Randy, I was a military person, and so I left and then decided I wanted to come back here because I had the opportunity to experience how lucky I had been to be able to come from Indiana and have that true sense of community. And that was a big piece of why I wanted to come back, is that I wanted to be a part of the next generation that's creating those kinds of opportunities for more people to feel that true sense of engagement. And that comes with not only having attractive places to champion in our community, but to have those drive true connection, which could take us on a whole other conversation around how people do and don't connect in the ages that we're in now. And so I think that's a space where Indiana can do well because of the history that we have here and the true sense of community that exists in many of our places. But we may need to think about how we're increasingly intentional about those kinds of experiences.
You're on mute, Richard.
Let others respond to that, but I would just say is that one of the things I think about community is a hard thing to message, right? Is that, when you think we're in this nationwide competition with an Austin or a Portland or a California, where you have these beautiful, interesting places, and Indiana has some exceptionally beautiful places, but it's not an ocean, it's not mountains, it's not Denver, so it's, to me, is like, what are the driving factors there that can change the game in that talent attraction part?
Well, and so much of this comes into the conversations that evolve around branding of a state, which it becomes so complicated for Indiana because we have such diversity. And folks come back to a message of, well, just come and experience it and you'll know what we're talking about. Because I think it gets into that emotional experience that people have of connecting to someone. And so then you do feel it, but how do you message that? How do you brand that? How do you communicate that in a way that other places are able to do in a more specific kind of geographic way? We have lots of folks taking notes, I think. And
Yeah, I don't know. It's you have
pondering this
people capturing
idea.
it.
Well, I'll just jump in and I mean, I think you just touched on something that we talk a lot about at Gal is, again, this like, how do you measure what you care about? And, you know, so much of what we care about is really hard to measure because it's these things you're talking about, sense of community or what makes you feel connected in a place. And so we are, you know, and I think we don't want to measure those things just for the sake of getting data and saying, you know, having those numbers, but it's more to actually find a way to document them so that we can just tell the story of their importance and make sure, you know, we can communicate that more easily. And I think as, you know, as designers that work in this firm that has a real, you know, sociological and ethnographic focus as well, we think it's also so important to understand what might those place-based drivers be that let people, or that create a platform for people to feel more connected or feel that sense of community. And that's going to vary place by place too, right? It's not like a formula that would get a blanketed across, but by understanding that, we could then start to be more intentional, as you're saying, like, okay, well, if we are trying to really figure out how we can get more people downtown or catalyze some more development there, let's think about what those ingredients are and how can we make sure they really come through in the long-term designs or in the short-term programming that we might be investing in to regenerate a place.
Julia,
I think it.
Go ahead, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think it's interesting, especially given, like Blair said, you know, in Indiana, we have such a mix of scales, whether it's urban or rural, and how that messaging really has to be comprehensive across both types. And I think in our practice, we really look at, you know, how does that impact the communities that we're working in? And you know, we use a lot of probably similar tools that Julia is referencing, you know, specifically Gallup Healthways Wellbeing Index, and coming from a city that's is at the bottom of the index, and that's really been the catalyst for us to reinvest and understand what makes the ideal quality of place, and looking at, you know, creating purpose and liking what you do, and having that social interaction. As well as, you know, liking where you live. There's a lot to be said with community pride, and while we can brand as much as we want, word of mouth really goes a long way with the communities and places that we're working in. I've had the fortune to design some projects in the Hub of Awesome, and I can tell you firsthand that that community is bought into their brand. They sell it, they live it, and they're looking for the types of places that enhance and build on that effort. So I think it's important to understand, you know, what that diversity of place can be, and how complicated a question that is.
Julia, what I was going to mention before, as a landscape architect, I'm familiar with your company or your firm, and the information and the data and the research that you all do from a design perspective. It's fascinating to be able to see that. And Richard and I have had conversations about, you want to create a place, a sense of place, something that resonates with people. But my experience working in small towns throughout the Midwest, larger towns tend to be a little more open, but small towns, the trick is, how do you translate, look at this research? Because what I keep bumping into with smaller towns is all they are looking at is money and dollars. And when you say it's worth, rather than just putting in a street, if you invest a little more, you can create a place where people will want to spend time, where people will want to move to your community. But sometimes Indiana's a pretty conservative state, from what I've seen. It's that trick of how do we educate? That's always a challenge when we work with communities, in educating them that this is, in the long run, if you're playing the long game, this is going to benefit your community greatly. If you just are fixing potholes and slapping in a new street, it's really not going to do a whole lot for you. Have you run into that in your conversations in Arkansas?
Yeah, Randy, I think definitely, and not just there, but I'd say around the country, and I think increasingly there is a lot of evidence and research out there about how place does have so many different types of benefits, but especially those related to economic development, and both in terms of investing in a public space, helping to catalyze some additional development, and also showing that places where people actually can walk and bike more on those types of streets, they actually spend more money. So I think it's we love seeing that kind of research, and it's about getting it out there. We've done some work in Akron, Ohio, and have just included Akron in a study we did with the Knight Foundation to understand the impact of investments in their Summit Lake Park, which is like a citywide destination. And we weren't looking at the economic impacts necessarily, but more broader community-wide impacts. But I bring Akron up because I think they have a real goal to revitalize their downtown, and in particular to help increase mixed-use development and residential units downtown. And their mayor has just announced that I think with all the recovery dollars they're getting, I think the biggest proportion is going to go to open spaces, and including parks and other types of trails and public spaces. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but it was really awesome to use Blair's word to see, because it was I think a real statement that we know investing in these spaces is actually going to help further our larger economic development goals. But and I think the other component of this challenge is having that long-term view and vision and plan, but also figuring out what are some of the immediate projects that can happen right away to help people experience how a place can be different, and the power of that, and that can happen through temporary projects, pilot projects, programming and events. There's many different ways, and I think giving people an experience so they can see a place in a new way and maybe discover new things in a new way also helps to build that support for further investment.
I think that's right. Maybe just to throw it over to Blair with an idea is that, I think we're going to see a lot of federal dollars flowing out of the stimulus package soon. And it seems, particularly those earmark dollars, that seem to be tied to, just as you're saying, and like investments in public space that will lead to future development. I just wonder if we think about those sort of things and how it relates to design and quality of place. I'm not that familiar with exactly where all that stimulus money is going, and particularly where the state budget's going. But just to put you on the spot, Blair, is that any thoughts there about like sort of where dollars might chase things that relate to quality of place and that would help talent attraction?
Well, I'm very excited for the opportunities that are going to come forward for not only communities, but regions across the state of Indiana. And I emphasize that because I think it gets at some of the pieces that Randy was alluding to, and a little bit Julia as well, as we think about some of the financial components. And why I emphasize the regional aspect is because it's really driving towards a collaborative mindset. And when you're operating in that kind of a collaborative space, then I think that drives a larger question around what is it that we're wanting to invest in and why. And having that frame some of the structure more so than than chasing dollars can often, as we see often happen, and not just in Indiana. I'm understanding this to be a common practice probably across the world of amongst nonprofit organizations and various entities that are having to try and figure out different pieces. And so when you can have a perspective where you're thinking more about how might we accomplish something together, and having that as the guiding values, guiding principles and questions that you're all trying to answer, then there's just a whole different, I think, perspective that gets taken around the art of the possible. And then moving into this space of how are we going to finance it, so that the question isn't started from a position of money, but the money is a constraint around the opportunity. And so with that, we're going to have the opportunity to provide some substantial resources for a significant amount of regions across the state. And it's going to be a bit of a cliffhanger here today for me to say, or a teaser for me to say there's going to be some more information coming forward around what a region may look like, some of those qualification pieces, and some idea seeds that we may look to plant of things to think about. But this model is really trying to build off of some of the lessons learned from a previous initiative that some folks may be familiar with, called Regional Cities, where there was a significant amount of attention put towards talent attraction elements as relate to quality of place, quality of life, and tremendous success that we saw from that initiative in many different ways. We also wanted to learn from that experience and say, what could be done a little bit differently? What do we want to think about differently as we head into this kind of a mentality of saying, we want to cultivate collaborative engagements, but what does that need to look like now? And so that's where we're looking at some of these more holistic aspects of not just the quality of place, quality of life, but how do those tie into different aspects of the talent development space, the educational components, the larger economic development conversations for business development. I've been spending a lot of time in the entrepreneurship space and thinking through what kind of a design does a community need to adopt to cultivate a startup community and that kind of a mentality. And so these are all things that we are going to be excited to infuse into this initiative that will be forthcoming shortly of some more specifics. I was just shared or got this information earlier today that there's going to be many visits across the state from some team members in our organizations sharing more of those specifics, of which I anticipate I'll get to be a part of that. And so stay tuned for everybody across the state of some really cool opportunities coming forward.
Well, it's awesome. And I really like your sort of deeply philosophical approach to say, instead of chasing dollars, chase the idea and then use the dollars to challenge it. It doesn't sound like a state leader, Blair. That sounds like that's amazing. Nothing against state leaders. I don't want to get in trouble here, but that approach is so fresh, and it seems like would solve the problems. But maybe to move to a different question, I'll turn this to Julia. So Julie, you've been working in Northwest Arkansas with the Walton Family Foundation and their Northwest Arkansas Design Excellence Program, which was modeled in some part off of the Cummins Foundation Architecture Program here in Columbus. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts on defining design excellence as a way to think about quality of place.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. And I
again, like a really easy problem, no problem. Just explain that if you would, please.
Well, I was going to say, I think so much of the conversation already has really been around defining this. So I don't want to sound like a broken record, but one thing I also, I don't know who's in our audience, but that this term design excellence is not a design industry term, right? This is something that it can seem, I as someone who came to design sort of through an interest in history and just like community advocacy, I was sort of intimidated by the design world. I thought like, oh, I don't have a lot of technical drawing skills like Andrew and Randy probably have, and I'm not sure I fit here. But this isn't something that only those with specialized training can understand, although lots of credit to those who have those skills. It's something we all respond to, and I think that's what everyone has been saying. And I think one thing we often like to do when we can actually be with people in a space is spend some time asking people to think about what are their favorite places, and where are those places you have fond memories, or where you like to take your out-of-town visitors, where do you go and you can spend have a day off. And often the places that come to mind, right, are those where you have a powerful social experience, and it's less about what it actually looked like there. And so, I think design excellence, as has really been said already, is so much more than physical design. It is about that experience, and that is what really has to drive the conversation. So I think when we think about what that means, it's really recognizing this national shift away from sort of static structures, monumental structures, or ceremony for ceremony's sake, and thinking more about these other aspects of activity, how the community can be involved, how we can really recognize local identity, and various histories, and also, most importantly, be flexible and adaptable, and set ourselves up to be able to respond to sort of the constant change that's happening in cities in particular. But I think Andrew touched on this too. There's so much diversity and variety. I mean, in one region in Indiana alone, and that's true everywhere. And so the last thing about defining design excellence is creating like a monolithic term. It's really instead trying to say there are many different ways of looking at this, but we do need some kind of shared understanding so that we can start to pinpoint those key indicators of what it looks like, and then use those to guide our investments and to document impact. But within that larger definition, there's going to be a lot of different goals that projects have, and many different ways that they come to life, and success is going to look different in different places. But primarily, this is going to be about the life of a place and the experiences there. And just to kind of come back to our earlier conversation around those soft things that are so hard to measure, I mean, that is what we really do try to extract from the responses people share to a question like, what is your favorite place? And there's other ways of doing that. And to really start to say, well, these are the qualities that came to the top. And, we can actually turn these into our design principles and our design drivers, and start to use them to go into a place and say, well, where do we see this happening? And where can people do X? And then, not only does it guide us, but it helps to then tell the story about the power of place that we constantly need to be doing, so that we can further build awareness for it, and hopefully, secure that investment it needs.
Andrew, to put you on the spot there, I thought you were nodding in agreement for much of what Julia was saying. Do you have any response to that?
I do, and not to repeat, because I think she put it explained it so well. But I do agree that, design excellence isn't this feature that you purchase, or a formal process. It's really inspiring, sustainable, resilient, and especially inclusive design. And as we look at the power of place, and creating and trying to drill down in each community, and it's always something unique to that community. What is it that we can harness to enhance and build on that success? Especially in Indiana, when a number of our communities are aging, that can be an asset, and that can be something that we can build upon, because there's a collective knowledge there. And so I think that, as we look to build towards the future, using that framework of design excellence to again, to reference back to what Blair teased, kind of promote the idea, and not necessarily the dollars and cents associated with that next project or the next series of projects.
I wonder, Randy or Blair, any thoughts about how you would think about design excellence as a concept, or as something? Are we moving in the right direction here? My hope for this panel is that at the end we might come to a little bit of a consensus.
As far as design excellence goes, it's really difficult to define it. I think as you work with different communities, obviously, you can hit the buzzwords with, it's got to be sustainable. Everyone's got to be able to use it. It needs to be equitable space, but each community has a little bit different take on those things. And so that, I think, as designers, when we go into these different communities, you really have to keep a very open mind, and spend a lot of time listening. They need to start having more college classes in landscape architecture and architecture about listening well, because it's so important to be able to really understand the community. Richard, working in Columbus, Indiana, it's very different than if you went down the road to Seymour. It's just, they're very different communities, and people care about different things or prioritize things very differently. So, from my perspective, I'm like I said before, I'm fascinated by Gail's research, and seeing how those things how they're starting to organize things. And I think that will help as you go to different communities, try to put these pieces together. But the trick is really understanding the community itself.
Which is so interesting to think about, Blair, a community, but then also a region, right? And the interesting, I think we pointed out, Indiana has urban and rural, and in those regions, there's both, right? In Bartholomew County, there are both, right?
Well, and we would be here all day if we went truly down this rabbit hole, but there's so many dimensions within that structure of urban and rural too. And I think one of the things that, as I'm sitting here listening to the conversation, that's starting to strike me is I really appreciate the term design excellence, because it plants a thought seed to then start creating around a little bit once you start giving some framework to how you're thinking about it. but it's not overly prescriptive. And so when I think about our regions and the diversity that's included there, and to some of Randy's point of being so important that we listen in our communities, that it provides this sort of platform for having a conversation around some of your hopes and dreams for the community and the region, and what that might all be, particularly because you may not be as familiar with a term like design excellence. And so you start asking these questions of like, well, how does that apply in my community, in my region? And what we've seen play out over the last couple of years through an initiative that we launched called the 21st Century Talent Regions, where we were trying to provide a platform that provided some like framework around a conversation like this, but wasn't overly prescriptive, so that it truly enables the community and the region to start to put all these different pieces together around priorities that they see, how they're defining it, and what then their vision is for their community and region, which led to so many other conversations around who's in the region and why, and looking at things like commuting patterns and anchor institutions and transit systems, and other ways that people can connect up to opportunity there. And by having some sort of a table that gets set for the conversation, which I think this term design excellence can do, then it really helps facilitate some of this further discussion that otherwise may be tough to get your arms around, because there's so many different places that it can go. And so when you're able to find that kind of magical balance of opening up the art of possibility, listening to what people have to say, but also ensuring that it doesn't become overwhelming because of all of the directions that it could go, then there's just so much possibility that can come from that. And where I really appreciate getting to have forums like this that help seed more of that discussion for our communities and our regions and the state overall.
Well, thanks, Blair. And we just have a few minutes left. I think we're ending at 2:45. And so I just, to go to Andrew and Randy, if you could quickly talk a little bit about, so design excellence isn't new. Both your organizations give out awards for it, yearly awards. And so maybe just, if you could just quickly sort of locate what design excellence means to, 1,000 architects, and what, Randy, probably 300, 400 landscape architects in the state, and how you guys try to get into it and encourage it through the award system.
All right, I'll go first. Well, at AIA Indiana, we've really embraced the framework that was developed by our national organization, which creatively is called the Framework for Design Excellence. And it's 10 principles that inform the design efforts towards a zero carbon, equitable, resilient, and a healthy built environment. And so what we are striving to do as AIA Indiana is to embrace and to highlight those projects that work within that framework for the broader community. And I think that we're able to really build upon the work of our talented members, and I am always in awe of what they do. But how we can essentially build upon that work to create more engaging communities. And I think we touched upon it a little bit, but as a business owner, that really is important to me from a talent standpoint. I'm trying to market to soon-to-be graduates from all over the U.S. and how the community in which we work in, Fort Wayne, reflects the values that they hold and desire to be a part of. So I think that, as a member organization, AIA is really looking to be at the forefront of that conversation and promote the idea of design excellence.
Well, Andrew, I unfortunately, INASLA is not, we don't have a, I think we're growing, we're getting better at our awards. But right now, defining design excellence, I think having metrics to be able to utilize when you're looking at awards, and the way we typically do it is the chapters, various state chapters will trade, and they'll serve as judges for other states. So we'll send our projects out to be reviewed by another chapter. But I do think I like the idea of having a set of metrics to look at. And right now it's pretty light. Now I will say that many of the that's not to minimize the awards that, the firms that are given awards every year, because right now there's incredible work going on in the state of Indiana. I mean, I think both on the architecture and landscape architecture side, there's a lot of talent in this state. And I've seen, since I moved back for the last 20 years, I've seen the level of projects just get better every year. The effort, like I said, downtown Indianapolis has changed so much since I've been back. And the projects that are going on with the cultural trail is a perfect example that kind of ties the whole thing together down there. What you have in Fort Wayne with the new riverfront, I've seen pictures. I've not had an opportunity to experience it yet. Those types of projects didn't happen 20, 30 years ago. We had the canal in downtown Indy, but that was, these types of projects are becoming more and more prevalent. And it's refreshing to see those. Other landscape architects are recognizing those when they're selecting our award recipients. So, but I like the idea of developing some metrics that say this is what design, this is an excellent design, and here's why, versus it just feels good.
Well, thank you all. I knew this time would go fast. So thanks so much for the conversation. Secretary Milo from the state of Indiana, Randy Royer from American Society of Landscape Architects and Hitchcock Design, Andrew Mitchell from the American Institute for Architects and MKM Architecture, and of course, Julia Day from Breaking Away. No, I'm from Gell. And so thanks so much. I think we all have an interest in making Indiana a better place to live. And I think that a big part of that is the built environment. And so again, just thanks folks for tuning in, and thanks to all the panelists.